Dragon's Dogma 2 is a very long and complex game with tons of underlying systems and mechanics that you will be interacting with throughout your playthrough for hundreds of hours. As such, in today's video I will be going over what I believe to be the best settings that you can use in Dragon's Dogma 2 to not only improve your overall gameplay experience, but I'll also be showing you the settings that I have been using to be able to run the game at a very high resolution with even ray tracing enabled, while still being able to maintain a consistent frame rate. With that being said, hello everyone, my name is Dark Hero and let's get started. Thankfully, Dragon's Dogma 2 settings are a lot better compared to the first game, so there is a lot that you can customize and tailor to your liking. If we come over here into the options and we scroll down into the camera settings, there are a couple of options here that I have tweaked, with the most important one being camera distance. By default, the game will start with this camera distance, with the camera somewhat close to the player model. However, given that Dragon's Dogma 2 is such a fast-paced game, and during those hectic combat moments you will want to make sure that you can see as much as possible, so I highly recommend that everybody puts their camera distance to maximum. From this image alone it may not seem like it's making a huge difference, but in combat that is actually going to be a pretty significant change. And of course, if you wish to, you can also close down the camera distance and make it closer to the character model. Though if you just want to take a screenshot of your character, you can simply pause the game and go into photo mode, and you'll be able to get a look at your beautiful character much closer. Another couple of settings that I believe most people should change is regarding the camera tracking and auto adjust. Camera tracking is quite simply going to make it so that your camera is always going to be staying behind your character's movement, unless of course you manually adjust your camera. Personally, I like having this setting disabled, because during those heated moments in combat, especially when playing as a ranged character where I need to back off the action to heal myself or just run away from the monster that is getting closer to me, a lot of times I don't want to look at where my character is running. I want my camera to be focused on the monsters that are chasing me, and by having that setting disabled just makes everything a little bit quicker for me. As for auto adjust, this one is going to quite simply vertically adjust the camera so that it is in accordance to the altitude to adjust to any differences in height, so if you go down or up a ledge, by having this setting on, the camera will automatically adjust. I personally like having this one turned on because whenever you are in a closed space, especially when we're talking about small village houses, the camera can sometimes get in the way, and with this setting, it helps alleviate that problem. And of course, if you wish to increase the camera speed and your aiming speed, you can do that. I personally play with a controller and I like to have this just a little bit quicker, and you can adjust the camera speed independently for mouse only, so that is very good. And speaking of which, if you come over here into controls, you are able to fully customize your key bindings and the button mapping as well. So you can totally change the way each of these buttons work, which is always very nice to see. And a very cool thing about playing with a controller is that thankfully Dragon's Dogma 2 allows you to change the button icons, so type A would be corresponding to the PS5, type B would correspond to the Xbox controller, and type C would correspond to the Nintendo Switch controller, although for some reason the button icons are colored. And of course, while we are here, you can also change your run type from hold to toggle, and I always prefer having toggle in video games, so I don't have to keep on holding the sprint button. However, in some combat scenarios, it might actually be best to go with the hold option, because if for whatever reason you need to readjust your movement, and you are on toggle, and it will keep on running until your character fully stops. Whereas if you have the hold to sprint option, by simply letting go of the button, the character will stop sprinting and you can make quick adjustments on the fly. It's a very small difference, so personally I don't mind running toggle, especially considering that Dragon's Dogma 2 is a pretty easy game. And down here in the game settings, you can change the minimap rotation, which is by default on, and I personally like to have it off, so that whenever I'm running around wherever it might be, I don't have to worry about losing track of where everything is on the minimap. And then we have the option of auto sheath, which is pretty much the same as in Monster Hunter, where if you have this turned on, if you pull out your weapon and you don't do anything for a while, it's just like in Monster Hunter where if your character has their weapon out and you are not in combat, the game will automatically sheath the weapon for you after a certain period of time has passed. Thankfully, the game never does this in combat, so you don't have to worry about auto sheath ruining anything for you. The next option is priority of materials to combine, which is essentially for whenever you are combining items, or whenever you have a pawn that has the specialization that they will combine items for you, and you can make it so that the game prioritizes taking the materials from the pawn. I personally have it set as the Arisen by default, which combines great with the following setting, which is the destination of the combined items. That is to say, where those items go after you combine them. By default they will go into the Arisen's inventory, but personally I have changed it to make it so that the items go to the item storage. And this actually makes a huge difference, especially early on into the game, where you are essentially picking up everything you can see, and you will eventually run into the problem where you are carrying too many things. While with this setting, you are able to use some of the items that are available in your inventory and place them directly into the storage without having to go up to an inn. And with how limited fast travel is in Dragon's Dogma 2, especially early on where you don't have a lot of fairy stones, and before you get any port crystals, this one setting has helped me out a lot. Now keep in mind that there is also a negative downside to using this setting, which is that you need to keep an eye on the amount of items that you have, so that you don't take all the items that give you health and stamina and put them all into the item storage, leaving you with no way to heal yourself without having to rely on a mage pawn. So again, if you are going to use the item storage setting, do be mindful of that. Now up next we have the interface, and this is all fairly simple. You are essentially able to make it so that all of these elements from the HUD are going to stay permanently active, make it so that they become invisible, or with the auto setting, as you may have seen before in the video, if I'm not doing anything for a while, as you will see, all of the HUD elements will go away after a brief moment, which just makes things feel a little bit more immersive, but the moment that you turn your camera around, as you can see, the HUD comes back up, so it's not even that big of a deal. So on this page right here I have everything by default, as I like getting all of these pop-ups. Now before we get into the graphics, I do want to highlight the sound option, for one specific setting. A lot of Dragon's Dogma 1 players complained that their pawns would talk a lot, and so the developers have actually heard their complaints, and have made it possible for you to turn off the voices of just your pawns, the voices of the player character as well as all of the other NPCs, and the voices of all of the enemies. And if you choose to, you can do that for all of them at once. Personally, I don't mind the chatter too much, but I am aware that some people dislike it, so having the option is always nice. I find this setting to be pretty funny, considering that one of the pawn specializations that you can get in the game is the fact that the pawn is just mute. Unless you go up to that pawn and speak to them, they will never utter a single word, and they have made that a specialization. And I find it hilarious that you can just ignore it and go down to the settings and have pretty much the same thing. And now let's take a look at the graphics settings, because a lot of players were complaining about the game's performance, and even I myself experienced plenty of frame drops until I got to use these specific settings that have made the experience a lot better. So all of these options here are very standard. I'm not running 4K because my monitor does not have 4K compatibility, and I have the game set to a maximum of 120 frames. I have VSync turned on, and I also have dynamic resolution. This is because without dynamic resolution I was never able to hit those 60 frames per second, which makes the game feel a lot more smooth, especially in combat. And here I am actually using DLSS because I have an Nvidia RTX 4080, and from all of these different settings that I have tested, having it set to quality, balanced, performance, or even ultra performance, I was never able to actually hit a consistent 60 frames per second with these settings. However, when I changed it to the auto option, that made the game run a lot more smoothly. Of course, with dynamic resolution, this is going to make it so that the resolution in some moments is not going to look as good, which is an unfortunate compromise, but I felt it was necessary for Dragon's Dogma 2, at least at launch. And of course, if you have an AMD graphics card, you have the option to go with FSR to get the same result. I have the upscaling set to maximum, because by having dynamic resolution, some of the image quality is going to vary a lot, and this can actually help me make the game look a lot better. And because I am running DLSS, I cannot touch the render mode or the image quality, or even the anti-aliasing. That being said, as you can see, I am running ray tracing enabled, which I was testing with the DLSS, and I was actually able to maintain a stable 60 frames per second in combat while ray tracing was enabled. That being said, I experienced some frame loss while in town, especially in crowded areas, so for the most part I would recommend turning this off. And then for the rest of all of these settings, I have it pretty much set to maximum on pretty much everything, with the exception of motion blur that I have turned off. I tested this multiple times by turning off and on each of these options, and it ultimately felt like they were not making much of a difference, so I just said f it and I have pretty much everything turned on, and with DLSS thankfully everything works out. And finally, of course, the network options, I would tell you to keep pretty much everything as is, so that you have access to people's online pawns, and so that people can actually use your own pawn, and as a result you may get some rewards from it. And with that being said, if you want to use my pawn, here is the pawn ID, I currently have Fighter and Warrior maxed out, and I will be maxing out Thief next, as I am planning to make this pawn an ultimate tank that is able to deal tons of damage and never has to stop to heal or go down or anything. But I will be making a video talking about my pawn setup later on, so do look forward to that. In the meantime, these are all the settings that I have been running on Dragon's Dogma 2. Let me know if there was something that I missed in this video, and of course we may be getting a patch that is going to help with the game's frame rate, which would be fantastic. And if that is the case, I'll be sure to let you know as soon as possible. With that being said, thank you all so much for watching. My name is Dark Hero, and as always, happy hunting!